Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your Chief Security Fanatic here, and today I'm positing the question, and I've got a lot of notes because I think this is actually very interesting and important. Does cutting off a major device manufacturer from updates harm its users more than the company itself? Now, here's what's going on. If you've been paying attention to the news or watching my videos or listening to my audio, you may know that Huawei is at a bit of an odds with the US government thanks to a Chinese trade war, or rather a US trade war with China, also due to possible espionage issues. In other words, integrated technology such as Huawei's 5G capability. The US government and other governments around the world are concerned that Huawei might be able to use that for spying. Now, as a result of this, the United States, President Trump issued an executive order basically saying that if a U.S. company wants to work with Huawei, they need basically approval from the U.S. government before supplying hardware, software, whatever that is. And this is what we're doing. And I've got multiple sources here. I think you guys are going to find this interesting. Now, Bloomberg, the first part of this comes from Bloomberg. They reported that several major chip makers, this is late last week, including Intel, Qualcomm, Xilinx, I've never heard of them, Xilinx, and Broadcom have decided to cut their ties with Huawei until further notice. Now, a couple of days later on Sunday, literally yesterday, according to Reuters and other organizations, Google suspended its business with Huawei and dropped its licensing on Android to Huawei. Now, what this means is that Google stopped rolling out Android updates to Huawei devices, and new Huawei phones are not going to have service or access to Google services such as Gmail, but existing Huawei customers will not be cut off. This is only new going forward. Now, basically, as I said, American companies have to seek approval for this through the U.S. Commerce Department if they want to work with Huawei, and so U.S. companies are simply cutting ties. Google has a long history of working with the Chinese government outside of Huawei, including Project Dragonfly, which I've talked about at length, which is a very heavily censored, locked down, and monitored search engine for the Chinese population. But we are focusing specifically on Huawei right now. Now, the question that we have to talk about, or rather what we have to understand is, how does this impact a Huawei user? There are millions of Huawei users out there, including those that may not be, let's say, aware of the news and have bought phones in the last couple of days here in the United States or other countries that are starting to jump on board with this. And so let's go through what the possibilities are. And a lot of this comes from Reuters, Business Insider, and Bloomberg, just so I'm transparent with my resources. Now, new Huawei phones won't have access to key Google services. This includes Play Store, which is basically where you download apps, Gmail, and it's not yet confirmed, but Google also owns YouTube and Maps, and they may also cut those off as well. Now, why this is an important thing is that basically the Play Store is the core app store for Google, and while you can download other apps for Android outside of the Play Store is considered the most protected. Studies have shown that apps that are published on the Play Store have a much less likely chance of getting you infected than if you're going to third-party sites, and so that might be something that users are concerned about. Also, moving on, no more Android updates from Google. Now, while Huawei is still able to access the freely available open source version of Android, I myself have downloaded and played with that, the same source that is reporting to, I think it was Reuters, is basically said that Google is going to stop providing Huawei with technical support and collaboration for Android and Google services. Now, Huawei responded to this specific point in saying, and I quote, Huawei will continue to provide security updates and after-sales services to all existing Huawei and Honor smartphone and tablet products, covering those have been sold or still in stock globally. And so, in other words, Huawei is planning on creating their own updates for this, but the reason why we update is two different things. It's obviously features and performance, especially when a new version of Android comes out, but it's also patching for vulnerability. And so, if Google decides to push a vulnerability patch out there to all of the Androids, I'm sitting here on a Samsung, for example, I'm expecting to get that patch at some point. Huawei will be cut off from that, which obviously exposes potentially millions of users, if not more, worldwide. Now, moving on, existing Huawei customers won't suddenly lose access to services, but here we go. In a statement on Twitter, Android said current Huawei owners shouldn't have to worry about losing access to apps like the Play Store. And I quote, "We assure you, while we are complying with the U.S. government's requirements, services like Google Play and security from Google Play Protect will keep functioning on your existing Huawei device." Now, obviously, basically what this means, and you should be checking with your carrier if you have a Huawei device. Multiple carriers have come out worldwide, from Verizon to Vodafone, saying we're not going to really see a change in this, unless something else changes. But as it is right now, if you have an existing Huawei phone, no worries. But again, when we are looking at new devices, this is basically cutting Huawei off from the critical development, which means that if the public is generally ignorant or not aware that this has gone down, that Huawei is not supported anymore, let's say they walk into their local cellular store to buy a phone, which is I think how the majority of us do it, if they're not being told that Huawei has been cut off on new devices, that's a serious problem. Or will major US telecoms like Verizon, Sprint, etc. just stop accepting Huawei phones as new due to the lack of support? So this is designed obviously to harm and hinder Huawei, and we're going to see where this goes. But at some point, as Huawei phones go end of life to those existing users, they may not necessarily be getting updates from their carriers, because Google may decide, if they choose to, if this doesn't end, to start cutting off, let's say, devices over X amount of years old, and that could be a serious problem for Huawei and their existing user base. And so the question is, obviously there's an element of politics here. There's an element of technology, surveillance, all of these things as well. But if we are cutting off potentially millions of new phones to Google services that Huawei is developing and selling, not just in the United States, but around the world, what does that do to the user base? How vulnerable are we making them? What is the now, let's say, threat level that hackers are going to see Huawei phones being? Meaning, the more we are not patching, the easier and more vulnerable they are, therefore the easier they are to hit. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but this is the world that we are living in today, between trade wars, trade imbalances, espionage, and all of this. Are we seeing a global alignment of the Googles and other major US and Western Europe tech corporations coming together to start isolating and shutting these out? And if so, then is Huawei just going to develop their own version of Android, their own operating system, and move on? And Google has just opened the door for a major competitor around the globe. I think that's another interesting thing. So let me know what you think, but we are living in a rather interesting time. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.